Ron Kessel. I work in southwest North Dakota as an agronomist, salesman for Helena Chemical, and work on a daily basis with ag producers making agronomic decisions to help them be profitable on their farm. We get involved a lot on their nutrient management plans, making nutrient decisions, cropping decisions. We'll talk about diversity and rotations, weed control. Weed control is a big thing. And also just trying to assist them in making good decisions and profitable decisions. I'm going to talk today about precision ag and using cover crops to address soil health, specifically erosion concerns, and some of the things we're seeing on the precision ag side of it that we would have never picked up in a general soil test. We're picking up with site-specific farming and taking this cropping system to the next level. The technology's been out there for a while. I mean, it's probably, some of this has been 20 plus years. I just don't know that we've utilized it, and I don't know that we've understood soil chemistry enough and have been able to utilize that knowledge to the level we are now. Soils is the final frontier, really. I mean, there's a lot of unknown in soil that we can address with precision ag. The big thing I see is we're using nutrients. We can use our nutrients in more efficient manners and reduce the nutrient load that's coming off some of these fields and ending up in water. And also, there's some nutrients out there we're just missing completely that we've never addressed them before, and we need to go back and address those nutrients and shift the dollars around and make better decisions that long term will be better for the environment, better for the grower, and win-win for everybody on this earth. Always be willing to change and willing to learn. One of the things that I've seen is tradition has gotten us stuck in some production practices that we need to get out of. Well, it's great to have the opportunity to present here today. And I want to talk a little bit about utilizing precision ag and cover crops to improve soil health. And first off, who is Ron Kessel? Part of who made me today is the place right in the background. That's the home section that I grew up on. It's also where my dad and uncles all grew up. They settled that place in the 1941, I believe it was, when they took it over. The previous family had actually left in the Depression. It was Farm Credit that owned it. They bought it back from the bank at that time. So this was taken in 2016. That's a malt barley crop we got in the background. Part of that sign is Helena. Helena's the company I work for. And with that, it's also given me opportunities to learn more about soils and soil chemistry. But I also learned a lot working for NRCS for 3 years. So I've got quite a few different hats that I wear. And just depends on where I'm at and what day I'm wearing it. And so I'm a husband and father, a farmer. My agriculture is real dear to my heart. And being that farmer piece comes out in me a lot of different times, and how do we be better, and how do we, do the job that we need to do. Agriculture is a noble industry because we're feeding people. We're feeding the world. So the branch manager piece, and get involved in the business side of agriculture, and looking at that. You also see it as a farmer from the farmer standpoint. I see it from the retailer standpoint. And I also see it from the general public standpoint. Salesman. Sometimes we get called to duty in our work to sell things. I mean, that's what we do. But also conservationist. Worked as a soil worked as an area agronomist. Conservation's, I think, a key important piece of what we need to talk about in agriculture. Anybody involved in ag needs to be talking about what we do. We're not just out here to take from the land and not give back. And we heard a lot about that today. And I'll talk a little bit more about it later. When I left NRCS, I went as a product manager. And what a product manager did for Helena was a tech rep. So I learned a lot about chemistries. Also learned a lot about formulation technology. Learned a lot about how we can improve our nutrient use efficiencies. And at the end of the day, when you look at nutrient use efficiencies, a lot of our guys that are involved in a traditional farming practice have very poor nutrient use efficiencies. And an agronomist. So the territory I cover, it's fairly vast. Down on the bottom is the blue dot is Hettinger. That's where I live. And if you go up here, right here's Belfield. The farm is right in there. We're on the edge of the Little Missouri National Grasslands. I extensively travel this whole region right here. And I work with a lot of producers. I look at a lot of different crops. I see a lot of different production practices. I see a lot of resource concerns that aren't being addressed. And that's something that really bothers me going forward, because we're only here to borrow this land that we're on. I mean, we're here short term really in the grand scheme of things. So we want to leave it better for the next generation. So that's the home farm there, and you'll hear me talk a lot about this place, this section today, because there's a lot of different things we've done. I've learned a lot of different things on this farm. And that was imagery from last year. And there's a lot of resource concerns on this place. When you look at the soils, and we talked earlier about productivity indexes, there's about 520 acres of tillable ground on this. It has a productivity index, an average weighted productivity index of 46. Not very good ground. We're farming some tough stuff. Some tough ground that's PIs of 29. But with the right production practices and the right technology, we've been able to take off some awesome crops. And I'll talk about that. So farming, every bit of as exciting as it looks. I think it's really exciting, but that's how the general public looks at it. They look at it as it's boring. Who really cares about it? The grocery store will have food. But we know in this room that's not the case. So I think it's exciting. And one of the reasons why is because of this, because of our soils. This is the cover of the Science magazine in 2004. And on there it says, soils, the final frontier. There is so much that happens in our soils that we don't even know, we don't even understand. We're learning it. Mark talked about the diversity in there and how much of diversity is in a gram of soil. And so I think it's pretty cool. But the one thing is, we've seen it earlier today already about how much erosion there is out there, how bad we are abusing our soils in certain situations yet. So there's a lot of work to do here. We've made a lot of work. We've made a lot of headway, but we still have more to do. So one thing we do know about soils, though, is higher organic matters tend to be more productive. Joe talked about his organic matters and the productivity he's getting off of that. We see that on our farm. Anytime we can do to raise organic matter levels, we tend to raise better crops. And why is that? There's a lot that goes on that I don't think we understand in what's all in organic matter. And really it's this humus layer. This is an undisturbed native prairie soil. And you look at that humus layer that's in there. That's where the really biology and the workhorse of what helps make these soils work. Nutrient efficiency, water holding capacity. It gives us that water-stable soil aggregate so we can reduce erosion. But one thing is, when we're farming these soils, we are taking organic matter back out of them. And when we were doing tillage in there, we were removing quite a bit. And this is a study actually done over in Poland, and they looked at the effects of cultivation on native organic matter. So it was about a 3% organic matter. But in that 3%, there was about half and half soluble and bound. The bound portion is what's tied to the organic matter that gives it that dark color. The soluble portion is water soluble. It's what we tend to lose, but it's also the most biological active portion of organic matter. And when you lose that piece, you lose a lot of the functions of organic matter. So in 20 years, the total organic matter, or total organic carbon dropped to a third of the original level. The soluble was dropped to a fifth of what it was. In just 20 years, we've been farming some of these soils a lot longer than 20 years, and they've been abused in some certain situations. So most of this oxidation is due to activity of microorganisms and temperature. So we do know building up organic matter in soil takes time, a long time. It's a decade or longer, I think. I mean, we see it happen faster, but I think it takes a long time. So the statement I got up here is farmers face the challenge of producing more on a shrinking capital resource base. There needs to be a critical management decision to utilize technologies and integrate production practices that create efficiency and return more profitability back to the farm. What is that shrinking capital resource base? I think it varies for every farmer. Some of it's financial, some of it might be labor, some of it might be the mental capability of understanding what's all going on and what they need to do. So every person's a little bit different. So what we do rely on is technologies to help bring some of this profitability back. And farming in the technology age, you know, you think about technology, our ancestors have all been farming in the technology age. And everybody's technology is a little bit different. Because I look at my grandfather's technology, what they talk about, the Green Revolution. They went from horses to mechanical. Their production practices were primarily tillage for weed control and residue management. And I think we forget about residue management, and why we did tillage was so they could get through some of the residues. The equipment they had couldn't get through that. And especially for anybody younger in the room, we probably don't remember that. So residue management was important, and tillage, weed control. Erosion was a concern, but fields were smaller. We weren't farming on as big a scale, so the erosion maybe wasn't quite as bad, or it might have stopped quicker on that border of that field. We had a lot of livestock in the system yet. We weren't going to primarily farming operations. Contour farming was implemented for water erosion concerns. Already then, they were trying to look at ways to reduce the erosion that was on the soil. The soils are relatively young. They've only been farmed for 30 to 40 years, and we're being mined unknowingly. They were taking good crops off, but we were taking things off the soil that we weren't replacing. Being native prairie, we were taking that organic matter, that mineralization, and exporting it. Starter fertilizers, they started to utilize them. 1846 was the one. The unique thing I think about fertilizer, now we talk a lot about sulfur and getting sulfur. A lot of the situations we don't have enough sulfur. We used to get it free. My dad was telling me that 1846 had all kinds of sulfur back in the day when they first started using it. Now the companies have cleaned it up. We don't have the sulfur. It comes in different forms. We've cleaned it up in our air. We don't get it out of the sky like we used to. It's not in our fossil fuels. So we're seeing more sulfur deficiencies. They started to use some herbicides in the 40s for weed control. Wild mustard was the big weed. And if you tell some young kids now that wild mustard was a problem, they'd think you're nuts. It was a huge problem back then. Fallowing land in 5 to 10 acre strips was common. Back then they had the thought process, we need to conserve water. We don't have enough. We live in an arid, dry environment. We got to conserve it. Now we talk about trying to manage water and make that water work better for us. So they were starting where they were doing with this fallowing system. They were starting to create some of the issues we have today. Talking about the salinity issues that we have. That stuff started 70 years ago. It's going to take us 70 plus years to fix it, I think. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. And change in management. So their crop rotation was hard red spring wheat, barley, oats, and flax. Flax was their broadleaf cash crop at that time. The interesting piece that I kind of forgot about was who dictated what they planted. Everybody was involved in the farm program. USDA dictated what they were going to plant. If they had base acres, they had to plant that amount of crop. They couldn't plant over, they couldn't plant under. So their flexibility to do things were tied a little bit. My father's technology, a 103 Melrose spray coupe. I cut my teeth running spray coupe or running sprayers with this technology. They were happy. They thought they had a real piece of equipment when they had this thing. And I look at what we're doing now for technology in spraying applications. So what were they doing then? Tillage was still their primary weed control and residue management. Erosion was continuing to be an issue. They were doing, Joe mentioned earlier, they were doing the best they could with what they had. They just didn't know. And we've learned more about how we can be better. Nitrogen fertilizer started to be used in the 70s. And soils were still being mined at that point. Herbicide use continued and expanded into additional pesticides. I remember him sitting in that spray coupe spraying methylparathion for grasshoppers. You want to talk about killing everything and killing biology? But they were killing grasshoppers, and at that time, that's all they were focused on was controlling the pests. We weren't thinking about how that was going to impact the other biology out in the system. Mostly a wheat rotation with some feed grains. They did have livestock in the system yet, but primarily cash crop was wheat. USDA program still dictated what could be planted. I remember them saying, well, we got to go either hay this portion or we're going to have to till it up because we're over our wheat base by 10 acres. Corn and sunflowers were added in the early 80s. At that time, for them in western North Dakota to raise corn, most of it was raised, it was silage. They were actually trying to work a little bit on grain corn. And what they were doing was, if it didn't work out, they run their cows on it, and it was an aftermath grazing program that they could make some profitability with. Sunflowers were a cash crop. In the 1980s, with the farm crisis and everything hit, sunflowers is what kept these guys in business. My dad farmed with his 3 other brothers, so they had 4 families living on that farm, and they were farming about, at that time, the 4 families, I think, was, of course, everything, a lot of it was half and half. I think they were right at about 1,500 acres of cash crop, and then they had about 150 head of livestock. So sunflowers were a big savior to the farm, but also added some diversity and added some rotation to there. But also added some erosion, because back then a lot of sunflower weed control was heavy tillage. Cultivating sunflowers, we were doing soil applied herbicides that were triple or double incorporated, and 30-inch rows. We've seen a lot of soil erosion, a lot of it. They didn't know any better at that point. Fallow discontinued in the early 1990s, and they started a direct seeding program with an Amazon no-till hole drill. Come through the Soil Conservation District when they had those first Amazon drills out in Dickinson area. The interesting thing is, I was visiting with my dad about this, getting ready for this program, and he talked about this deep plowing. And I forgot about it until I was talking with him again. This was in November of 1974. That fall, they went in and they were trying to bring calcium back up to the soil surface, was what it was. And they took this deep plow, and I'm guessing it's about 18 inches. If you look at that disc, that's a big plow, and they had a tractor in front of it along with another cat. So they were pulling 2 implements to run that thing. And you look in the background how they plowed that up. And that was done on that Section 3, the home farm. And Dad says he can still see it, and I'm trying to picture it in my head. I can't see it. I got to pay closer attention now. But they did about 10 acres in that one spot. And I think for a long time, it hurt them. They plowed all that good soil down, and took a long time to get that to come back around. So my generation's technology, what are we doing now? We're doing direct seeding methods. We're farming with residue and trying to keep that residue on the ground. We're using pesticides and crop rotation for weed control. So we've gone away from tillage for weed control. Where I see tillage used quite a bit yet is for residue management. Is where I see more guys trying to use tillage. They can't get through with the drill, or they got hairpinning issues, so they want to do some sort of tillage to alleviate that. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But erosion continues to be an issue. I mean, wind erosion, when we first started farming, we were keeping cover on the ground, but there were still areas where it was an issue. We've greatly reduced it, but we've taken it to another level. And cover crops have helped us do that. Commercial fertilizers are still being used. I think we're using too much nitrogen, and we're not using nitrogen in the right ways. We need to do split applications of nitrogen. We need to be understanding better on what nitrogen's doing in our soils. We're using GPS technology, guidance, auto boom, application maps, precision ag's being implemented. We're trying to learn more and use that for a report card with our yield maps on what we're seeing out there. We're also using it to understand the chemistry in that soil and why do we have issues in some of these areas and how do we address them, or can we address them. We have a semi-diverse crop rotation. I guess I'd probably say it's more diverse. And you get to western North Dakota, we're seeing more diversity all the time. You know, the traditional just straight wheat guy is kind of going away, but there is still a lot of wheat and canola. And there's more pulses coming into that marketplace also because of the benefits they provide. But our rotation's not a set rotation, what I found. I mean, big believer in diversity. I want to throw every wild card I can at Mother Nature, because if you get too much in a rut, Mother Nature's going to find a way, and you need to have that diversity. So our rotation's all over the board. All those crops are in it, but sometimes they're stacked, sometimes they're single, sometimes they got a cover crop in between them. The big thing, though, I see is the USDA no longer dictates what we can plant. Freedom to farm. I remember when that first came, that was a big issue for us, freedom to farm. And I remember Dad and them making a big comments about that being a good thing for the U.S. farmer. I don't know what the future generation's technology is going to be. We're ever evolving all the time. This is my son, and someday I want him to have that ability to be on this land too. So how did Prairie Gold Farms, that's the farm that my brother and I operate, and how do we get to where we are today? We grew up on that section of ground, but we both left, all of us left the farm and went to work. And with 4 families trying to make a living on there, we knew it wasn't going to work at that time, that we needed to go get an education, go better ourselves from an information standpoint, and come back later. So in 2005, the opportunity come up to rent 143 acres. Probably some of the toughest ground you'd ever could farm. It had a PI of about 43, I think is what it was. It had an issue of salinity, it had erosion concerns, but we were so aggressive to want to get started, we did that. And how we did it was, my dad and uncles were still farming, but they were going through their own changes on downsizing at that time. So we didn't want to get involved for family reasons. And so we went and worked with a cousin. And we traded labor for equipment, is what we did. And so that was in 2005. And then in 2006, my dad and uncles had retired, split the operation up. We ended up picking up part of that. I had some cousins of mine that picked up the other part. And then an opportunity come in 2007 to pick up some more, so we got up to about 1,300 acres. The extreme drought in 2008. 2008 was a bad year for us. And so we dried out, and we were so desperate, for financial reasons, the markets were fairly good. We were combining 2 bushel flax and just trying to get enough money gathered up so we could get the bank paid back. Then we also got caught with a hailstorm. And so the little bit of residue we had, we pounded it to the ground with a hailstorm. And then we made the decision we probably need to seed some winter wheat. Market looked decent, and we needed to get some cover on some of this ground, so we did that. We seeded winter wheat into wheat stubble that there was really no residue at all, and with a hoe drill. And probably a good thing we did do it with the hoe drill anyways, because if you go back to some of the old soil loss calculations, they talk about ridging to keep that from blowing. That did help us there, but we still had some wind erosion that happened all winter because it was an open winter and we didn't hold any snow on that ground. We blew it all off. So it was that winter that we made the decision to purchase our own equipment because it wasn't working out trading labor for equipment. It just wasn't working, and we needed to be on our own to do what we wanted to do. So we come over to Burleigh County, and we bought a 20-foot hoe drill. I helped Jay get a hoe drill out of the county at that time, and we drug it back to western North Dakota. It was a good thing for us, for our operation at the time. So that was taken January 17, 2009. And if you look, there's a lot of snert, snow and dirt. And that winter wheat crop did not make it. So that next spring, we were seeding spring wheat back into winter wheat. Now, from an agronomy standpoint, breaking the green bridge and wheat streak mosaic gets to be a big concern. Well, we already had broke the green bridge that fall. We weren't concerned about it at that point. But we went in, and this was sprayed out, and we seeded back into this wheat stubble, or this winter wheat ground. One thing that we are a firm believer in is trying to keep our waterways as much vegetation growing in our waterways as we can. So when you get these heavy rainfall events and you get extra water, that you've got some vegetation there to slow the water down and filter things. So we double seed everything where we got to draw. Everything gets double seeded. We do it when we first start the field, and then when we go through, we just seed right through it. And I see a lot of producers that run disc drills today that don't double seed because they got acres to get across, and it does not, that's disc drills, hole drills too. They got acres to get across. They don't do this double seeding. We start getting some water erosion. It doesn't get any, the washout doesn't get any smaller. It tends to get bigger with time. And I'll show you a picture on that. So by double seeding these areas, we don't apply any additional fertilizer. We just put down the seed. And that's helped us out tremendously on alleviating some water concerns. So September 2009, we were harvesting that crop. On a PI of 46, we cut over 60 bushel wheat on that ground. Dad had never seen in his 45 plus years of farming that good of a crop come off that soil. With that, it gave us some extra money to do some things in because we had a good year. But residue management, because we're using older technology, was a concern. It's still a concern for a lot of producers in my territory. Hard to see, this was at night, but we're cutting through, but there's about 18 inches of stubble, and you can see all this extra residue that's on there on that heavy wheat crop. That grain there was probably around about 75, 80. I don't know, we didn't have a yield monitor in that combine at the time, but for 2 years, we fought that residue right there because we didn't want to do any tillage. We didn't want to do anything to disturb that. What we needed to do was change and we did. We went and put a chopper in that combine and made some other management changes. But it helped us understand some production practices that we were doing. We didn't have a disc drill, but we wanted to start getting to use one. And we knew if we were going to raise winter, we needed to be seeding it with the disc drill because we wanted to keep that residue there and catch that snow cover so we didn't have to worry about freezing that crop out. So we rented a neighbor's drill that fall. With that, we do some pre-harvest burn downs, and it's a double-edged sword, kind of, I think. What I do like about it is, Allie mentioned earlier about the kochia concerns. Kochia is our #1 weed that we're fighting, and there isn't a farmer that ever has kochia of his own. It always comes from the neighbor, because our fields are all clean. It's always the neighbor's kochia we end up with. But we've started to use that to help manage some of this kochia. I agree completely. We need to leave it grow and use that water up when we can, but we've got to terminate it and not let it go to seed. There's a lot of issues when we let this stuff go to seed. I see that in some season-long cover crops too. We let all the weeds go to seed. We've done a great thing for the soil and cover and biology and diversity, but now we got weed control that we cannot handle. I had a producer this last year, full season cover crops, sprayed it out, but they let all the weeds go to seed before they sprayed it out, seeded corn into it. He had a beautiful corn crop. Well, we were dry this last season, didn't have the row closure, the row canopy, got the late season rains, the Russian thistle and the green foxtail come through there. When he come to harvest time, he couldn't harvest it. The Russian thistle was so bad that it wouldn't go through the combine. And so he ended up leaving about 25% of his crop out there because he was lifting the header up, and it was short corn, he couldn't get up underneath it, left it out in the field. This producer doesn't have cattle, doesn't have livestock in the area, so he wasn't able to utilize that. But I think if we'd done things different, if we'd have went in and terminated them and not let that weeds go to seed, we would have been better off long term. Weed control is going to get to be a lot harder, I think. The glyphosate resistance we got, and we've got some unique weeds. Allie talked about water hemp coming in. And we got narrow-leaf hawksbeard coming in from the north. Tough things that we're going to get to where we're adding 4 or 5 different chemistries to control them. We also need to implement the cover crops and have them in there because Mother Nature is going to find a way to cover that ground. So we can't take the crop off and not cover it. We need to get back in there and seed something so that we can compete with those weeds. So we seed winter wheat, and this year we decided to use we did not have a hoe drill yet, and we didn't want to rent the neighbor's drill for financial reasons at that point. And we said, well, we're just going to use our current drill we have. And Mark talked about landscape and landscape diversity. We're not believers in running in the same traffic paths all the time. Because what we've seen is you're in that same traffic path, and if you got rolling landscapes like we have, you start getting depressions and water starts to run down on these fast, heavy rainfall events. So what we do is we try and change our patterns a little bit. It's worked for us. We're on our farm. Not saying it's a good practice, but it's worked to manage water erosion on our farm. And so you can see we're going at an angle compared to what that crop was seeded before. We're doing one-pass seeding then. We've changed how we're doing nitrogen management too, because now that we have the disc drill, all our winter wheat, we do a split application of nitrogen on it. The one thing we didn't like is our stand. From the road, it looks good. If you look in there, good thing winter wheat can compensate fairly well with tillers. That's a poor stand, very poor stand if we're going to try and raise high yields. That was also the year we tried our first strip till for row crop. And that was done late, November 17th. And why we wanted to look at strip till was to try and warm the ground up for our corn. We were having production issues with the corn not getting going in the spring, and we weren't happy with the stands we were getting because of that. We also were looking at fertility, trying to get that fertility placed. I don't like spreading fertilizer on top of the ground. If we're going to do fertility, I want to try and get as much of it placed from the geometry standpoint, get it below the soil surface. And I'll talk a little bit about nutrient stratification at the end of this. So we did that, but we didn't do it right. That was an older machine, did not have rolling baskets on the back. We made a nice strip there, but we didn't get enough time for that, or a rainfall event on that, for that to pack back down and seal up. It was a nightmare the next spring. Talk about make a guy sick when you had water erosion running down those contours. Wash the soil out to the depth that we had worked it. So we've changed how we're doing our strip till approach on things now. Actually, what we've started to do, and I've even seen on machines that have the rolling baskets, I don't think we get a firm enough pack on it. We run a roller back across ours. It works for us. We get that ground firm back up. But so October of 10, we made the decision to buy a drill, and we purchased our own disc drill. And with that was a time we were experimenting with one-pass planting or strip till. We didn't know how we wanted to do it. Most of our row crop now is still a combination of both. Some's planted on strip till, some's planted on one-pass. Depends on what crop we're planting back into. Here we're planting back into flax. When we have tougher to manage residues, we use our planter to manage those residues. So along came the CSP program, and it had been out for a while. We got involved with the 5-year contract starting in 2011. And really, at this point, this is when we got exposed to doing more of the cover crops. Working with Jay and the NRCS crew, had heard about it, seen some. We just hadn't taken it to that level on our farm. So when we signed up, we did the Crop Technology Bundle 3. We had those 4 enhancements in there, and we had to implement buffer strips. And from a producer standpoint, the best thing we did on our farm was implement buffer strips. From a retailer standpoint, when you start reading pesticide labels and buffer zones and water quality concerns, more farmers need to be doing buffer strips. We're not doing enough buffer strips, and the applications they're making we're stretching the labels on some things. I hate to say it, but we are. So 2010 imagery compared to 2015, we put that buffer strip in along this waterways, and this is the dugout dam combination. You can see the resource concerns. We got salinity issues. We got water erosion that's happened over the years. They put a pipeline in through here a couple of years ago. I didn't realize how bad the erosion was on some of that stuff. We got 8 foot of topsoil eroded into some of those areas. That just happened over time. But this buffer strip added a lot of efficiencies too. Instead of trying to farm in all these nooks and crannies along here, and you're running a 100-foot, 120-foot sprayer boom, I don't care how good an operator you are, you're going to end up catching that boom over places that it doesn't need to be. So we squared some things off, seeded it back into a conservation mix. It's become wildlife habitat for us. We like to hunt. We like to have some pheasants around there. It's been a great deal for that. From a productivity standpoint, I think we gained. I know we gained on the crop insurance side of it because our proven yield has come up on it. And what we're saving by not trying to farm in these little nooks and crannies has made us money. So then we added the cover crops to the system. Our very first cover crops were done after harvest, and the first ones were done after a wheat harvest. And one of our problems is at that time we didn't know it, but you got to have the drill sitting in the field when the combine pulls out. And a lot of times producers want to wait and they want to get their weed control done and then come in and seed it. It's too late. That's where the pre-harvest operation would come in. You can get that burnt down. It's already done by the time you get that combine out. You seed your cover crop and you don't touch it again. If you have some Canada thistle concerns, you can come in and do a late burn down for your thistle concerns. But you got cover on the ground and it's got time to grow. That's the biggest thing we run into is time. We don't have enough time to grow it. This here situation was peas. We took the pea crop off. And here we seeded a warm season grass. We put millet in there with some turnips and radishes. And the millet grew really fast. And then we did, since it was peas, we didn't add any additional peas. There was enough volunteer pea there that when we caught the right rains that come up. And you can see there's some pea in that mix. That was in October 23rd. We didn't freeze. We had a late fall. But millet can't stand cold weather. And one little frost, we would have terminated that growth really fast. So we thought about that the next time. We wanted to use something that was going to grow more in some cooler weather. We ended up, we had a lot of people ask us, aren't you going to forage that off? That's too good a forage to leave out there. No, that's there for a reason. That's there for armor on the ground. So then we strip-tilled into this. We seeded corn this last season. And on about 5 inches of rain, we took off about an 80-bushel corn crop on there. This last year or so. We feel that reducing the evapotranspiration is a huge piece of it. Keeping the cover on the ground is helping us manage that water better. We're managing water different. Instead of trying to save it, we're trying to keep it from evaporating. That was the pea crop. I think that was about a 47 bushel peas we took off there. And then we seeded that millet back into it. In 2017, on this same section, this was done in the northwest quarter in 16. In 17, we did the south half and took them off, but we didn't, I just said time's against us, we didn't get in there and seed it right away. We should have been in there right away. Because of labor constraints, I don't get back out to the farm very much to help. We run into some labor issues sometimes, and we didn't get it seeded. The previous year, my nephew, who's 15, come back to help us. And what a great way to train a new young operator on how to run a piece of seeding equipment. Put him in there with the cover crop. He's learned how to run it. If they're going to make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. And you can manage that mistake later on easy enough. So we seeded barley with turnips and radishes back into this thing. And it wasn't seeded till it was about mid-August, I think, about the 20th when we finally got it seeded. And we should have had it in there earlier because the peas were off early August. But you can see we got some pretty decent cover. It doesn't look like much. September 2nd, there's what we had. And by leaving that pea ground that open, we're just losing too much erosion or too much soil to erosion by not having that cover. The other thing is I see a lot of this layering effects in everybody's fields out west. And there's a lot of guys who are thinking they're doing a great thing for soil health with the disc drill by not disturbing it, but they don't have the diversity in their system that they get that layering effect, and it's getting worse in some situations. And this is a jackhammer radish, or jackhammer radish right here. You can see we went down about 8 inches, pushed through that. We're seeing it get better. It's not getting better over fast. I mean, we got sunflowers and corn in that rotation. You'd think that would improve faster, but it's not. And some of it, I think, is the soil chemistry we're dealing with. We have some calcium issues there that I'll talk about later. But in that little bit of time frame, we're changing some things. We're adding some diversity back to the system, and we're protecting it. We also did barley on this because of the saline issues that are there. We're actually getting some of these areas to shrink. 2011, 5 minutes. 2011 was an extremely wet year for us. We had a lot of salinity come back up to the surface. And then we're adding this organic matter back to it. So then we started to explore with precision ag. We did our first VR map. We e-seeded some fields. We VR'd corn and sunflowers. We didn't really understand at that time what we were doing, but we needed to start somewhere. So what is precision ag? And I think a lot of times we think about precision ag as a technology. But really, it's not. It's not a product. It's not a technology. It's not hardware. It's not software. It's not a light bar. It's not a yield monitor, section control. It's not satellite imagery, green seeker, grid soil sampling, or it's not all those different communication technologies there, or BS for that matter. It is agronomy deployed at a higher level of resolution, spatially, temporally, and financially. We're doing agronomy, is what we're doing. And we're using all these other tools to be better agronomists. Well, what is agronomy? It's the Greek term for field law. And where I really think is when we look at this definition, it's a science and technology producing and using plants for food, fuel, fiber, and land reclamation. We had 70 plus years of abusing those soils. I think we can use cover crops to help us with the land reclamation of what we've done there. What we've done with our soil test program is we go in and we put these soil sampling points based on electrical conductivity data, and we run analysis on them, and we look at pH, we do a complete analysis, we look at everything. And the one thing that we're seeing out there is more pH concerns than I ever thought. When I went to school, to college, it was, well, you don't need to worry about pH. Out west, you don't have pH concerns. I've got producers who have fields, not just little areas, they got 120 acre fields that have 4.4, 4.5 pH. When you get that low of a pH, you don't grow anything. Mother Nature wants to cover the ground. We got weed control concerns. We've got barnyard grass growing on sandy soils. Because the pH is so low, the barnyard grass can handle it. So we've got to change the way we're farming those soils. We're reevaluating it. When we put it on an average, and I am not a believer in composite soil tests. I think they got a skewed data, and we're making a lot of important decisions on skewed data. We need to look at it this way because there's so much variability in these soils. We've got pHs that are high and pHs that are low. We look at potassium. Well, you don't need to worry about potassium. You got plenty of it in your soil. When you do a composite soil test out west, our potassium data is skewed because we've got high areas and low areas, and when you blend it all together, you come in at about a 190 part per million. Yeah, that's not bad. You don't need to worry about it. When I get over into these areas here, I've got some serious potassium concerns. And you look at what potassium does in a plant for managing water, regulates the stomates and opens and closes them. If you don't have the stomates open up, they don't shut down because it's deficient in potassium. So all your water that you were trying to save is going right up in evapotranspiration. So adding nitrogen to that ground really isn't doing us a bit of good. The law of minimums, it's probably potassium that's creating us issues. So we're going to look at potassium closer, look at organic matter, and interesting in this field, I haven't noticed it in all of them, but look at where our potassium levels are low. It almost mirrors where some of these organic matters are a little bit lower too. Sodium's another big concern that we have out there, and we just need to manage that water. So will your fertilizer program minimize your losses or maximize your profits? We talk a lot about nitrogen and phosphorus. We got to look at other things. And the keys to fertilizer availability is the 4 R's, the right rate, the right form, the right placement, the right time. Understanding that crop. Joe talked about wheat not getting enough. You're going to need to apply nitrogen on it because your mineralization isn't going to happen fast enough for you. This shows that. You got to understand your crop growth curves and where they need nutrients and where they don't need them so you can make that right application. Nitrogen, it's important. It's the single most important nutrient to mankind because of protein production for the human diet. It is essential in amino acids, the building blocks of cells. It's taken up in mass flow, but it can be leached easily. It can be lost easily. I challenge my guys, if we have a lot of nitrogen in the soil, we got an issue going on. The soil is a poor place to store nitrogen. I don't want it. That precision ag map there on nitrogen, we're only at about anywhere from about 10 to 20 pounds in the top 6 inches. Granted, it was a pea crop. I don't want any more than that right now. That's going to go back to wheat this next year. I'll manage my nitrogen how I want to at that point. And I had a very progressive producer who told me if we have nitrogen getting down below the 6-inch layer and we got a lot down there, he says, I got a leak in my system somewhere, somehow. I got to try and fix that. He said, because I should be either split applying that nitrogen and managing it on the environment, or I need to change my cropping system. We do a lot of split applications on our farm. For time's sake, you see a lot of, the location I work at, we run 3 floaters. We do a pile of work with spreading urea on top of the ground. I got mixed feelings about it. I'd like it in the soil if I could, but it's also what we need to do sometimes. I think we need to look closer at foliar nutrition on some of these products. It doesn't take a lot of N to make a big difference if we put it in the right form at the right time. So that could be something that we tie in with a current herbicide. What resource concerns do I see yet as a CCA? We have too much water erosion out there yet. I see a lot of this yet when I'm scouting fields. Guys running drills, they're getting across the acres, they're not taking the time to fix these. These aren't going to fix themselves. We're going to need to come in and do some sort of earthwork, moving, I don't know what it is, and seed a cover crop back in it to get it solid. We do a land roller with a smoother that we fix those. Once we get them fixed, we don't have to worry about them. They're spread out enough that the water doesn't cut again. But there's a lot of that happens yet. Too much wind erosion. We heard about it today. And why I really get worried about this erosion is because now we're to the point we might not be moving actual soil particles, but we're losing our most active portion of our soil organic matter. And that's what's giving us water-stable aggregates. That's what's helping improve water infiltration, adding diversity to the system. So we need to stop that. I see too much residue management with tillage yet. This is the new thing. Everybody's got to have a vertical till, it seems like. And some of it, I think, is just a matter of setting the combine right and changing the crop rotation so we can manage the residue. Too much residue being removed from fields. This was a flax crop that we took off, and I think that was 2009 or so. Well, to manage the residue, we said, well, we're just going to windrow it and bale that flax stubble off. For 3 years, we could see it to the line where we had hurt ourselves by taking that flax residue off. This was in Adams County this last year. Drive by it every day. I get to see all the wood and topsoil that blows off of it. Just makes me sick. This is a tough one to say here. I'm going to throw it out because I see it sitting in my desk as a branch manager, and it bothers me a little bit. There's too many producers implementing conservation programs just for the money. I ask, what do you need to do? Why are you doing it? Well, because I have to. I'm in a CSP program and I have to do it. I got problems with that as a taxpayer. Are we truly getting the return on investment for what we're doing? And are the resource concerns being addressed? Sometimes I don't think they are. They're good tools. CSP was a good thing for us. I don't want to make it sound like it's not. We just got to be evaluating if we're truly getting what we need out of those tools. Nutrient stratification and no-till. This come out of the October 2017 Crops and Soils, the American Society of Agronomy magazine. They're talking about phosphorus loading in Lake Erie. Phosphorus moves through 2 main ways. Erosion on the soil particle or dissolved reactive phosphate. And what they're seeing is this stratification, more of this biologically active phosphorus is on top of the surface. And it's getting into our water systems. We got to be more aware of how we're managing our phosphorus. And that's where in my mind, I'm like, we got to get more of it placed and not on top of the surface. And it's just one of the natural things that's going to happen with no-till. But cover crops and precision ag, I think, can help us manage that. So take-home points, zone or grid sample your fields for soil fertility. Make decisions on good information. I think a lot of times we make too many decisions on poor, skewed information. I'm a believer in keeping cover crops simple right now. I agree with Joe and the other producers or presenters that talked about diversity. A lot of times when you're a new producer doing cover crops, they want to make this complex thing. It's too complex. They can't manage it yet. Keep it simple to start with. Add the diversity to it after you understand it. Manage nitrogen according to the environment. Fall applications of nitrogen just bother the heck out of me. From my standpoint as a branch manager, I like it. I'm selling fall nitrogen. Is it good for the environment? I don't think so, but everybody's got to make their own decision. Tissue sample to evaluate nutrition in progress. What are we missing out there? Are we truly missing what we think we are? And provide information for better decisions. Any questions, comments?
Thank you.